This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with this is your host, Pooka. Say hi, Pooka.
Welcome in.
What are we talking about today, Pooka?
We're finally getting to, I guess, the final kithbook. Official kithbook, at least. The long-delayed, long-awaited, long-hoped-for kithbook Baggins. C20 edition.
Yeah, at least from the initial core kith, this would be the last one that was left out. So even if we get more official books in the future, this would be still filled in a very important hole.
The Baggin players waited so patiently. I think it was during the roundtable, I think Pete said something like, of course this had to be a Kickstarter goal. They had waited so long. But anyway.
Yeah. So this is by Christine Beard, Abigail Korfman, and Meg Woodworth. And developer Pete Woodworth.
It's such a joy to see some Tony DeTurlizzi cover art again.
It'd be last of the kith books by him no matter what.
Yeah.
Unless I hired him, but that seems highly unlikely. So,
I mean, you never know. I'm sure he...
Yeah. Also, this came out 2018.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't listened to, I guess, our mini-sode about the cancelled books from the end of second edition, and then our episode on the old kithbook Baggins, this had initially been slated for release in 2001, then 2002. Then it was just kind of available for pre-order on websites for a few years, even though it was clear by that point that it was never going to be published in the old World of Darkness. So, published in 2018, but gestating for far longer.
So, yeah.
We start with the story.
Yeah, like clockwork. This was sad.
It was bittersweet, I would say. I mean, it is sad, but it is also like, oh. And to me, I know that I've kind of railed about how in the core book when they say, oh, changelings who are undone, other changelings just should avoid them and it's painful for them to be around. And this to me, I think demonstrates how to do it better. You know, like, yeah, it is difficult for the awake changeling in this story to be around her old friend who has since been undone, but it's not like she just casts her off completely. Like,
no,
you know,
I mean, she still has a husband. Who's
exactly. So, yeah. A knocker married to a red cap with a best friend boggin cleaning lady. What a combo. It's like a sitcom, you know?
Yep.
And it is good that those elements are addressed head on in the text, like woven into the actual story. So, anyway, I thought it was sweet. Good elderly knocker vibes as well. But it's not an origin story. It's not like a here's how the Baggins got their birthright kind of thing. No. So it's rather different.
I like it though. It's very Baggin. And then we get to chapter 1, a short history of Baggins.
Yeah. And right off the bat, I have to say, all right, Brian LeBlanc's art. Historically, I have not been the biggest fan. The artwork in this book, and I know he also did a lot of work for Chronicles of Darkness in the interim between Original Changeling and this book, but I, haven't like kept up with it or anything. The art in this book that he did is so much better than his old stuff.
That's the most friendly dragon I've ever seen. Well, that still looks like a dragon.
Yeah. Like, compare this to the lesbian satyrs, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he improved. And I think there's well, they're not lesbians, but there are satyrs in this.
Yes. Anyway, points for the artwork. So right away in this chapter, we're kind of leaning into the whole angle with the Fomorians ruled the earth and humans served them kind of thing, which I don't like. Yeah, it feels like Kithane mythology, right?
Yeah. I'm just going to say, like, there's a common theme, like, in this book. I thought I hated this book. Spoilers, I don't. I have nitpicks.
Yeah.
I actually do. I think it's one of the better Kith books, actually.
Agreed.
But there's it's like it really has a lot of the things I don't like about C20 that are in it. So that's was sort of, but if I distance myself, I'm like, no, you know what? I actually think most of this book's pretty good. Although there's a few things in this chapter we'll get into.
It gave me the feeling at certain points as though it was building on like 90% on C20, but then 10% on conversations that didn't get outside the writer's room, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it works. I'm like, oh, okay, I get what they're doing there. But it was just like, that's not been spelled out anywhere in C20 that I could recall. And maybe there's stuff in the player's guide that was kind of like in progress as this was going, that when we read that one, it'll be like, oh. But yeah, it was a little bit, took me out of it.
Although there's some stuff in here that's contradicted by the player's guide. So.
Also that. There is a bit in here about the humans who served the Fomorians, and like, who were they? Is that like infernalists?
Yep.
But we're told that Baggins arose from the embodiment of hope, representing labor for one's own sake rather than servitude, against greed, and ultimately they're the dream of constructive community, I guess you could call it. They are the most opposed to the Fomorians, because their dreams of safety and stability and warmth are all things the Fomorians are not about.
Yeah, and that's opposed. I mean, they don't like the Fomorians either, but it's also the opposite of. We get big sidebar on the Changeling Way.
Yeah.
Apparently Baggins did it.
It's an interesting note that the time realm is key. I'm like, oh yeah, I like that. And that the dreaming itself is what made the Changeling Way take hold.
Yeah. There's a trigger every time you die. It reasserts itself, I guess.
Boink. Although I doubt that the trial and error to figure out the ritual was completely harmless, as this book would have us believe. Just, I don't quite buy that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things in this book in general, including this chapter, is... Okay, this feels like if this was written by a boggin, which it's sort of... It's hard to tell. It's one of those... Is it in character or not in character? But definitely, if this is written by a boggin, the boggin writing it, what are they hiding? What's their bias?
Yeah.
Like, it's definitely a little bit too pro-boggin, if that makes sense.
There's a single reference somewhere to like, you didn't hear this from me or something, and it's like the only instance where it sounds like it's a character or it's explicitly a character.
Yeah. So. Either way, I do recommend these kind of chapters in general in any World of Darkness book you treat as is sort of in character, like because I mean it's contradicted by other books, including other Kith books in their history chapters. So
yeah. So with the Changeling Way, I like the idea that the Baggins are kind of like the ones who figured it out first, because they were close to mortals, and even during the Sundering, they really tried to... They invented it or came up with it as a way to stay in touch with their mortals, even as magic receded from the world. And I dig that.
And they did it like early, it sounds like.
Yeah. Too. Early Sundering, whenever that might be. There's some random notes about the Middle Ages. I'm like, oh, okay, that's... fine. And then the Shattering. Interesting about the reliable Baggins who served the Sidhe being called upon to like pick and choose who would get to go to Arcadia and who would survive. That makes perfect sense and is like has never been mentioned that I can remember. So
yeah,
that kind of historical guilt, I imagine, for the Kith. But then for everyone else, they were like, just try the Changeling Way. It's better than disappearing. We get the note that they largely negotiated the truce between the Seelie and Unseelie courts and organized the motleys, or after the Shattering, organized motleys around the households they tried to maintain and kept the balefires well stoked.
Or the balefires that will well stoked were stoked by them, I guess.
Yeah, the ones that didn't go out.
Yep.
I also like the note that they were especially stung by the Sidhe abandoning everybody because they were like the devoted seconds in command. So they stepped up to kind of keep the Fae society together as the trolls moved into more of that like figurehead leader role. But yeah, paired with their historical guilt is some historical grievance, maybe.
It says here, the Escheat is one of the few Fae agreements not backed directly by the dreaming or enforced by glamour. I think that came up in a previous discussion.
The Black Plague piece, I've largely come around on the Black Plague as a catalyst for the Shattering, because I know there's been like discussion about whether it would have been more dark glamour or banality. I come down on the side of eventually it was just banality. Like at some point it just was such a worldwide numbing thing, or continent-wide numbing thing. But the text presents it as a consequence, from the Kithane perspective, a direct consequence of the Sidhe's leaving, of abandoning them. So the Shattering was like already done with. And the suggestion that the dreaming was like so offended by that act that it caused the Black Plague, it's like that's That's one peevish dreaming. You know?
I think this is, again, in character thing some
Yeah,
Baggins
yeah.
is this is where that. Yeah, and I mean the whole banality thing in the Black Plague, like I think it would have been dark glamour followed by more and more banality from hopelessness.
Yeah.
And then like the 50 years after would have actually been a surge of glamour, but
For some.
well, okay, maybe not for the nobility, but for the
Yeah.
commoners.
There were also recurrent waves of plague too,
That's
so
true.
you know.
It's a bit more fear, but there was also a lot of change. But
yeah, for anyone who was riding that wave of change, the Unseelie probably got into it more than the
yeah.
Seelie at first.
Well, I meant mortals, commoners.
Oh,
but yeah.
Well, them too.
Yeah.
And of course, this is like the Cathanes shattering in particular, but
mm-hmm.
There's also the suggestion here that this is what might have spawned the Dante, and I'm like, no thanks.
No, that's just anything with Dante, and we both agree on that. And
yeah.
Again, it's one of those C20 things we don't like, and is consistent in this as keeping with it. There was a comment here about like Vulgate Bibles leading to less religious extremism. I'm like, that's not what happened.
Yeah. All right. So in the interregnum section, which it curiously says is, quote, one of the largest stretches of time in changeling history. I'm not really sure what that means, but okay, whatever.
I mean, there wasn't really a lot of changelings before the interregnum.
I guess that's true. But it's kind of like, yeah, that's 90% of their history. Anyway, it's presented as being like punctuated by these hopeful bursts of glamour and then banality kind of reasserting itself. But it reads like a very Protestant then pagan take on this period of history, because it is like, it's very different from previous World of Darkness stuff where it's like, well, actually the old ways survived until like 1800 or like whatever.
Yeah.
And here it's much more like, yeah, religion happened. Religion was unreservedly banal. Tell that to House Liam, but okay. And and then like only the Reformation kind of broke mortals out of it. And it's like,
no, if you know anything about the Reformation, that was some lesser known movements and figures were maybe not as banal as you might think, but like Luther and Calvin and stuff, no.
Yeah.
Those were autumn people.
Well, and then there's also, even before the Reformation too, like in the Renaissance section here, it says like, oh, the mortal source of inspiration was the most banal of them all, religion. I mean, it's like, well, all right, but
well, at least it's not anti-science.
I don't know. It's taking a stance, and it's a very firm stance, which, you know, I'm not here to be a religious apologist, but at the same time, I'm like, I think we need to be a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, but it's weird which aspects of religion they say are banal and glamorous.
And it says right there too that new discoveries and methods became viable sources of inspiration as well. So
yeah, like the printing press being it cool. Like I get that.
Yeah, and fashion and artisanship, all of these things, and tea. The sidebar on the creation of reverie, though, I do really love that because it's hugely important to the setting as a tie between boggans and mortals.
I don't like it started here, though. I think it should have been way before. Like if they had to think, like even before the Sundering, they developed but it was boggans reverie. That would make more sense to me.
I would say it's almost, they may have inspired mortals to the point that they generated glamour before the shattering, but this was like when it became, oh, this is our primary way of getting it.
That would make more sense, yeah. Like just like the Changeling way, like
yeah.
But I mean, we have like that whole team that's based around.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
If you think of like the Muses,
the Aunas were doing it for a while. Maybe it's the refinement of reverie into gaining as much glamour as you do. I don't know, something.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like needing it because you can't just sip glamour from the dreaming. That would make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We get some notes on imperialism. I'm fine with the Baggins being like abolitionists and early anthropologists, but if you want your game to be a postmodern commentary, let's call it, within the context of the grimness of human history, cool. But having any kith as a whole kind of glossing over any historical guilt they might have as humans, that's a choice.
Yeah.
Because kind and friendly people can also perpetuate systems of repression.
Yeah, and not realize that they're doing that, especially if you're like a boggin, you're not going out on the edge of doing this, right? You're back home a lot of the time, and that would, you don't see the same things there.
There's a little bit of having and eating cake simultaneously because that's what boggins do best.
Yep.
The Industrial Revolution bit, I think, held together better. talking about how they were terrified with the death of the cottage industries. Kind of a contrast to the knockers in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on board with them saying they were labor reformers, partly because there's almost an element of direct self-interest for them. If they were to support strikes or Luddites or whatever, it's like, okay, yeah, if they break down the factories, they get their dreamers back to where they've always been. So same for like the women's movement or any of the other sort of political stuff that's here.
Yep. And then we get into the timing's a bit weird for the thing, the bit about the nuclear family. First of all,
yeah,
that's not the resurgence.
Well, the resurgence here is almost presented like a period, not an event. And the same for the evanescence, which I don't hate.
Yeah. But the resurgence was not in the 50s.
No.
But the other thing is, it's like, oh, Boggins were pro-nuclear family. No, they would have been, because the nuclear family was all about replacing the extended family. Like, that's not,
Yeah.
The Boggins would be all about the extended family. So
they would want a strong family, however many people were in it.
But I think they would want a strong family with cousins and uncles and second cousins. That seems much more Bogginy.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a missing piece between the conservatism and the progressivism of the Baggins, because they're kind of presented as one or the other back and forth in different ways. They're like selectively activist.
Yep.
Pursuing causes that will enliven hearth and home.
Yeah. But like, I just think their particular causes don't necessarily line up with how they're presenting the Boggin Kith, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. If nothing else, this is probably the most we've seen about the interregnum in one place for a single Kith.
Yep.
So that's useful.
I mean, they were the biggest deal in the interregnum. Them and the trolls, but the troll Kith book did not. Anyway, let's not talk about that.
We get a note somewhere that they're the most populous Kith in here, and I was like, oh, well, all right, I guess I can live with that.
Well, I guess if it makes sense, like, they had the most changelings when the Shattering hit.
Yeah. So. It is curious to think about them in the 50s as, like, punch card makers and, at the same time, civil rights activists.
Yeah, this whole book is, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's, like, very much Boggin women as the focus. I mean, it's not like there's only Boggin women, but it's like...
Yeah, I'm cool with that. There's the note that when the Arcadian She came back, the Baggins, their loyalties were split because the She kind of like, well, first demanded what they had built over 600 years, but then also didn't like give them any kind of acknowledgement as they did with the Trolls or the Autumn She. And so the Baggins were like, well, this sucks. And then when other Kiths saw that, they were like, hey, if even the Baggins aren't fully on board.
Yep. I mean, that fits like with what we read in Fool's Luck and things like that too, I think.
Weren't they also, I seem to recall that for the Beltane Massacre, it was like a Boggin was leading the delegation or one of the main figures. The Accordance War actually gets very little, which, that's fine. We've heard enough.
Yeah, I think the Accordance War is interesting. It's maybe not proportionally the page count we need, though.
Yeah. And then the new Camelot of David Ardry, appealing to them for a time, and then the meta plot happened.
Yep.
Something I didn't realize until going through kind of the take on David here, because this, I would say, almost advances the David meta plot slightly. And we hear about him, like, you know, his state of mind and how he's increasingly out of touch with reality. I hadn't thought before about King Lear parallels. Because, I mean, obviously there's lots of Shakespeare stuff throughout, but he's got, like, the 3 heirs, and he's kind of losing it. So I'm not an expert on King Lear, so I'd have to go back and read. But I was like, huh, that's food for thought.
I can't even remember if we did that in school or not. I think we did, but I has like no memory.
Flagging it for future.
Yeah. I do like when it talks about the Evanescence here, and it's just a bunch of things happened, including 9/11, that I'm cool with as opposed to it being 9/11.
Yeah. The evanescent age, perhaps.
Yeah. It's like there was this few years with just lots of scary stuff, scary glamour, scary whatever.
It definitely also leans into the shifting mood. I know, like, on Mage the Podcast, friend of the show, Terry Robinson, has talked about kind of the half editions. Like, there's the way the setting looks when the edition starts and the way it looks by the end, and there's usually a transition point somewhere.
Yeah, and sometimes there's even more than one.
More than one, yeah. And so here, the Evanescent era, I guess you could say, is like, oh, dwindling glamour and guttering balefires. And it's kind of a grim picture, which doesn't, I mean, I know they kind of make reference to that here and there in the C20 core book, but C20 core just feels so awash with glamour to me.
Yeah,
So,
I wonder how much is supposed to be a meta plot change and how much is supposed to be retcon.
yeah.
Like
Or
maybe
both.
if you think about the awash with glamour in the C20 core book, maybe that was supposed to be like since the resurgence it's been like that.
Or maybe this was, again, something that was discussed in the writer's room, but was not. Because we see this in like Harbingers of Winter, too,
Mm-hmm.
where it does feel like there's a firm transition from one kind of setting to another.
Yep.
But anyway, aside from that, we get Boggins on the internet. So,
Mm-hmm.
although the honeycomber pun in the sidebar is
Yeah.
like, come on.
By the way, the dark web depiction here, when I run World of Darkness stuff, including Changeling, I like having it as sometimes it's like the Hollywood TV scary night news version, like in terms of the autumn
Mm,
world, and like that's the dark web in World of Darkness. I'm cool with that. It's not quite like that in real world, but
no.
exactly. But it feels like '90s internet with people talking about how cool the dark web is. That's most of the
Yeah.
dark.
But I like how it almost echoes a lot of early internet discourse
Mm-hmm.
about like the promise of connectivity and community and
Yep.
all of that kind of stuff. And then we do get stuff about like, oh yeah, they use social media for gossip, etc. But I'm glad that we have, because the older Kith books didn't touch this at all, and now that there's been 20 years in between, it's like, okay, yeah, it makes sense that they'd have to talk about this
Yeah.
more.
You're talking about ties to Harbingers of Winter, the crowdsourcing thing. It's like this is Kickstarter, but Changeling reminds me of the Uber for Change, or
Yeah,
the not Uber necessarily, but like the dark side of that, where you're like, I'll pay some glamour if you clean my house, kind of thing. With the app.
yeah. And also the DIY culture stuff and
Yep.
resisting the kind of late capitalism crunch
Mm-hmm.
hustle.
This part feels dated weirdly. Like this feels very much more 2018 than it does 2024.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot's happened since.
Yeah.
But I do like when RPG writers kind of sneak in little, here's what it's like to be an RPG writer, like into
Mm-hmm.
the text. As long as it's not too, I don't know, sanctimonious.
Oh, okay. So I was just thinking very Etsy.
That too. Overall, it's an interesting take on their history. I would have liked to see a little bit more complexity, but I appreciated that for the specific things they wanted to talk about, the authors seem to have thought through a lot of the steps to get where they wanted to go.
Yep.
And it's definitely a modernity oriented take, contrasted with like the earlier Kith books where there's basically nothing after the resurgence. So
Yep.
it's different, but I like it.
I'm noticing too. This is the set that yeah, going art for the next chapter, including and then the art for the previous. There's signature character like the signature characters at the back of the book are in here. I didn't clue into
Yeah.
that till looking at this. Oh, that's
Yeah.
yep.
Priya's in the first one, and then this is Greg Ganaway and what's her
Yeah,
name?
we'll get into them later, but
Yeah. Spoilers. Chapter 2.
yeah, upstairs, downstairs.
I'm glad that the authors seem to be fans of British television.
Yes. Well, I mean that is so.
Yeah.
You were talking about The Help or something like a she-run freehold full of boggans. There's a lot of British television to watch about that.
And film.
Yep.
Gosford Park, still great example. Anyway, I really love this opening on page 25. I think it just sums up the Boggans very elegantly,
Mm-hmm.
and I would recommend reading it for anyone who wants to play a Boggin. Just talks about their core dream as being the normal folk of the magical world. And yeah, this is where it is. They're the most common Kith because their dream is universal.
Yep.
So, in Fey society, they tend to be the homemakers / administrators, stewards, etc.
Sometimes making the home literally.
Yeah, house building.
Yep.
Crafts role. They are crafters, usually artisans in a single craft, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
I like the note here that they are servants, but that does not mean they are servile. They provide services.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, service workers. And also hermits. Frankly, we need more hermit boggins, like the log lady or something.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I could have used more information about the higher purposes hermit boggins say that they serve, but
And we get their would have been one called Motley's, but like the Kith based boggin groups with knitting circles being a common term for them, even if they don't do any knitting.
yeah, the casual kind.
Yep. So that's the social group, and then what's the group called again?
I think a crew is the next
Yeah,
one.
crew.
Like it's kind of unclear,
The
but
chef. Yep.
yeah, it's a squad if they only have like a single purpose. And then communes. The all boggin freehold or motley that draws inspiration from socialism.
Or maybe socialism draws inspiration from that.
Yeah. Again, it gets tied into the Shadow Court here, which...
yeah. I mean, that they could keep track of what the Shadow Court's supposed to be. That might help.
That would be great, yeah. Oh, speaking of keeping track, I really liked the note that, like, one of the things that often causes drama within a commune is when members infringe on the responsibilities of others, and there have been fights over doing the dishes when it's not their turn, and I desperately want a chore wheel treasure.
Yep. I think the whole Shadow Court thing, I think the C20's Player's Guide did a tilt on that. And if
we'll get there.
If you set that tilt away, I think if you set that tilt away, it's not nearly as bad here, because they're not saying the Shadow Court's bad here, or Thallion associated, or whatever.
That's true. I mean, later on there's more, but yeah. I like the description of gossip here as the first great unspecified payment. Like, that's just great for their work. And its characterization as a consequence of their interest in people. Like, they want to know things about people, not necessarily use that information, but they certainly will if they have to. Especially the Unseelie. They seem to be much less well-meaning than the Seelie.
Yeah, that's another thing, too, like the way they present Seelie versus Unseelies.
Oh.
Throughout this book.
Yeah, I'm going to have a comment about that in chapter 3.
Yeah.
For sure. Both groups are seduced by scandal, and then the whole gossip economy can be disrupted when there's a gossip implosion. Oh no. I'm glad that that's one of the, like, capital letter terms that we get in here.
There's so much gossip, everything just falls apart. Everyone's like,
add it to the lexicon.
Yep.
So then traditions.
Yep. Housewarming.
Makes sense.
Labor Day.
Also makes sense.
Yep. Spring cleaning. They get really intense on that.
Yeah.
Harvest festivals. Thank you for rejecting the weird American idea that the U.S. invented Thanksgiving. But
as opposed to the thousands of years of gratitude-focused harvest festivals.
Many of which were called Thanksgiving. And anyway.
Yeah. The best event, however, is coming later in the book. So we'll get to that.
Boggins status.
Yes. There's a nice note in here about how they seldom chase noble titles because really it just brings busy work that gets in the way of real work. And then they insult, chronic busy workers have earned the derisive nickname of blind bees. Like, ooh, ice cold.
But I like that noble title thing also seems like it would, like, them and trolls would agree on that.
Yeah. Like, listen, we don't really need this. That being said, we're going to have to talk about boggans and houses later because of a section in chapter 3.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
The emotional labor epigraph is abrupt.
Yep.
But, all right. We're told that the boggans believe in only deep emotional management as part of their job, and they kind of steer clear of jobs that require the shallow type. I don't think that should preclude a character from, for example, being a waitress or a retail worker, but it points to... we've talked about this before. I wish there were a Kith-specific antithesis, because that would be a great one for them. Like, being required to do work that is expected to have, like, a minimum level of emotional performativity or something. Yeah.
I remember seeing that going, that's so American.
I mean,
it's a little bit Canadian, too. I'm going to say that. But, like, yeah. That's like people from Europe, for instance, come to the US. They're like, why is everybody so friendly? But they're not. But
Carol Beer as an Unseelie boggin would be great. But anyway, the overall description here reads like an essay on how to prevent toxic dependence. And frankly, it's something the boggans could probably use.
Yep.
Like that advice. And that feeds into a discussion of having ultra-stable, above-board romances of various kinds.
Yeah, I felt like maybe they should have also talked about how that can go wrong for them. But because if you're a super people pleaser, that's not going to always lead to the best romances.
My sense is that the boggans would also sometimes feel like they know what will please their partner better than their partner does, wrongly or rightly. That thought process.
But also just, it's like, you just keep giving and giving and giving and never ask for anything in return, and then you're getting taken advantage of. That's not a healthy...
Even boggans have a point where they're like, all right, enough's enough.
No, but I mean, that can fall into that. Anyway, I know.
Yeah. They're the most patient for relationships among the kiths, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Because it says, and I do like this framing, they take pride in everything they build, which includes relationships, and not necessarily their own, because they have their matchmaking tradition to support community.
Yep. That's all relationships, not just romance.
Yeah, exactly. They relax with baking, casual crafting, smoking, reading, or just hanging out.
Yeah. There's the debate about what to do about smoking. They've come up with chimerical tobacco substitutes that don't cause the health effects.
Some boggans split the difference and find non-tobacco substitutes to smoke. Indeed. I liked the section on their sort of fight techniques, though, as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, boggans, they may seem like pushovers, but you get them into a war scenario, they are.
Yeah. And especially a war scenario, logistics are very important, and they're very good at it.
And also quarter mastery,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the abstract noun would be for that process. Task-oriented sabotage, rapid building of defenses, all good things to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me feel better about the combat mirror we get later.
Yeah. And they also, not in a combat, like active combat scenario, they weaponize gossip, and they have vengeance squads, they're information brokers and blackmailers, like all the things you could imagine a pissed off boggan being able to do with all of the information and skills that they've accrued.
Yep.
Don't cross the boggans! It is a little bit weird that at the end of this, though, we get this bit about, like, obsession in Bedlam. I like that it's there, I'm just perplexed why it's like tacked on at the end of like talking about their blackmails.
Yep.
So feels like old school Daunting stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not even feels like Bedlam. It's like running. It's like, yeah, it feels like more Daunting.
Yeah.
That's the problem when they changed the Daunting. They left a hole with the Daunting served. So.
Well, and this would be great, like, if the Daunting still functioned as they always had, and you had a section that was, here's how boggans can go Daunting, I'd be like, oh, awesome, useful. So I think I'm just going to use it like that, actually, now that I'm saying it. I'm like, yeah, that's...
Mm-hmm. Let me get to the meaning of work, which is an interesting description. Which I think this makes sense.
Yeah. They do work because they enjoy it, because it's the function of purpose and choice. I'm like, all right. And they like doing things for charity, but they will not be taken advantage of or allow others to be taken advantage of.
Yeah. That's a thing knockers would agree with them on, I think.
Yeah. And it makes sense for why then retail would be like anathema to them, because it removes purpose and choice from the workers.
Yeah. And they're talking just like big box store retail, not like your little shop that you have.
Indie bookstore. Yeah. Well, we get an indie bookstore owner later on as a template. So. Yeah. Also, speaking of things that are so American in here, the Black Friday Squad.
Like, oh, right. Yeah.
A guerrilla organization of boggans that gathers in crews after every Thanksgiving and deploy to department stores across the country. They refold clothing, pick up litter, repair displays, and buy nothing.
Do you know we get like Black Friday weeks now here in Canada?
At some point, it started becoming like Black Tuesday before Black Wednesday, before Black Thursday, which was Thanksgiving, and then Black Friday. And you're like, wait, hang on.
Because we always had Boxing Day as our thing, not even that at all, and then turned to Boxing Week, and then we got like Black Friday, and you're like, but we're not, nobody even gets Thanksgiving, they don't get that Thursday off, why is there a Black? And then it would like turn into the next week would be sales, and then you look at the sales, they're not very big sales, and that's very strange.
Yeah. There's some notes about debt that boil down to, as they put it, the huge difference between becoming indebted and accepting responsibility, with the latter being done willingly and openly. And there's a nice tie-in to the Elves and the Shoemaker fairy tale or similar ones about like fairies being freed from their labors by charity. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool.
This felt like maybe this should be like a section on how they view the codes, but no.
Yeah, it would be nice to have that.
The debt and the debt and then honor, the banality of debt and then the honor of service. I'm like, wait, this is code stuff. What are you doing? Yeah.
Well, and the honor of service is definitely born out of like socialist logic.
Yeah.
What is it? From each according to their
ability,
means, to each according.
From each according ability,
whatever
to each according. I never liked that. That's like a really low bar.
It definitely seems like that's the root of this, though.
Yeah, but it's like, why should you work yourself, give everything you can, and only get what you need? Like that doesn't. I think everyone should get better. Have to put in this and get more. But
Tell that to the Baggins.
Yep.
Well, and then gratitude is immediately after that as a value. Don't take the one who helps you for granted.
That's a very fairy tale too.
Yeah, oh.
But also makes
for
sense.
sure. What is a home? This kid's book tells us. Stability, safety, love, born from understanding, and Hestia.
Yeah, didn't they say earlier religion's banal? Anyway.
Well, only Christianity.
Okay.
I like the home as the first thing idea. There are a lot of like literary flourishes here and there that I guess point to the multi-authorness of this book. Like it's a sudden shift in tone where there's like a really artful sentence fragment. You're like, oh, okay, who wrote this? I don't mind them. It's just curious.
Yep.
And speaking of religion, we then also get this sidebar on household gods, which it doesn't say they're all boggans, but I feel like the older editions would imply it, at least for the lesser ones. But
was there any in Egypt, or were those all Pooka still?
Bess is listed as one of the greater gods, I suppose. In any case, it reinforces the historical and universal importance of their dream, the sanctity of the house and home.
Then we get birthrights and frailties. This was very detailed, but I felt pretty helpful.
Very helpful, especially having the text at the start of each section.
Yeah, that was nice. We'll get into that later when they didn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's like they get into exactly what craft work counts as, and it actually suggests like there's edge cases where it sometimes does and sometimes doesn't.
They can get injured by working too fast.
Yeah. And then it can also cause problems for them because they get too much free time, and like if they have a hobby they enjoy, depending on the hobby, it could also get triggered by this, and then they're like, but I'm done my, and you're like knitted too many socks or something.
Did you see the Lower Decks episode with buffer time?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of. And then we also get some details on the Craftlympics, which is the single best boggin competition there is.
Yep.
Speed crafting. It's like that Danish knitting show. Going to share the link in the show notes. Anyone who hasn't seen the Danish knitting show.
You sent that to me. I didn't get a chance to click on it. I should.
Yeah. Des dost I don't know how to say it. Something like that.
You did too many your consonants are too hard.
Den står strikkedist. Whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's competitive knitting. I think there is probably at this point an English-speaking great knit-off show. But the Danish is the first one that I saw, and it will always be my favorite. Anyway, Baggins.
Yeah, and then social dynamics.
Yes, stemming from imagining themselves in other people's positions. Observation and empathy. But not necessarily capital E empathy, because subterfuge can find its way in, too.
Then Call of the Needy and what this does and doesn't do and how to deal with those edge cases.
I liked the note that the Boggans see their frailty as their own personal call to adventure. It's like, well done, the kith.
and it's much like some of the, like, they're a kith that are proud of their frailty. Not ashamed of it, so that's good.
Yeah, and they'll sacrifice their own well-being for others.
Yeah.
They'll even help an enemy in genuine need.
Well, and I think the way I think of that one is like, just because you don't have to make that willpower roll doesn't mean you can't do the thing still. Right? Yeah. You still choose to help your sworn enemy.
So yeah, good stuff. Overall, a thorough chapter. And it strikes the balance I like to see between like the Fae society stuff, the culture of the kith, their private lives, maybe a little bit less involvement with humans than I would have expected or wanted to see, but there's still a little bit in there. It is very dense as a chapter, and I like that. Yeah. Meaty.
Now we get chapter 3, Beyond Hearth and Home.
Stark contrast. Yeah, I didn't like this one quite as much.
Yeah, especially after that last one was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is where they're just a weird view again on what Seelie and Unseelie mean. And like, I can't even quite get a handle on what they mean here, let alone whether or not I like it. Like, I don't think I like it, but I can't grok what they're really getting at.
Yeah. So the way it seemed to me was like, okay, obviously they're mostly Seelie, and what distinguishes the Unseelie as it's laid out here is that they're more pragmatic. Nothing that they provide is for free, which means they avoid the nobles who demand their services, and they enjoy mischief and scandal more than their Seelie counterparts. Yep. So that's fine, but that's all we get on the courts.
Yep.
And it's just, to me, it's not enough. And it does also say they're not much into the Shadow Court because they make subpar foot soldiers. And that just, again, it's a choice of presentation that
But
I'm
what
like,
about the previous thing the Shadow Court was talking about? That's like, I don't know.
exactly. Yeah. It's inconsistent, and there's just not enough words here to help me out. See also the following section.
So yeah, we get the sheet, and this is more on like Seelie and Unseelie, but I don't know.
I mean, it's a little more solid. I'm glad that it does say Seelie and Unseelie for each one.
Although some of them are still liked by the Seelie and Unseelie. So
yeah.
Equally.
In some ways, I kind of felt like the descriptions here could be for any kith almost. Like once in a while, the word craft pops up or the word work. But otherwise, I'm like, all right, yeah, of course they're going to divide it up like this. The Right of Ignorance one did annoy me, though.
Yeah, that annoys me.
Yes.
Okay, it's saying that Seelie never enchant mortals and Unseelie do, but it's very reckless of them. I'm like, what? And that's violating their right of ignorance?
I think it's reckless of them because of how much freaking temporary glamour it takes to enchant someone in C20.
Yeah, but it actually is flat out saying it's violating the right of ignorance to enchant a mortal. Like, what? That was not how it was presented before.
That's a read.
Yeah.
They both like the right of rescue and the right of life. So that's something.
The right of life, I'm even not sure.
Yeah, like it could have used more nuance for a lot of these. I mean, the takeaway is like the Escheat is primarily a Seelie thing, and the Unseelie are kind of awful and craven in how they sometimes apply it. That doesn't give me enough to really work with.
It doesn't say how they're awful and craven, how they apply a lot of this. So it's
for a lot of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things like, they demand compensation for safe haven. All right, sure.
Which also, that never quite made sense as an Unseelie thing to me at all. Necessarily, any more than a Seelie thing, but
yeah.
Let me get their kiths.
Yeah.
Their opinions on other kiths.
Buckle up. How do we handle this? There's a lot.
Do we need to go through all this? This is just it's what
I've got my one-liners if you want to.
Sure, I'll do that. Okay.
All right.
Clericon.
Generally, they get along because the kiths have similar gifts for reading people, and, they're fine.
Issue.
Welcome distractions from the daily routine, so long as they behave.
And a mutual thing I like. Knockers.
Admirable, which is rarely a mutual feeling, except for respect for work ethic, perhaps.
Piskies.
Immature and flighty. Although I did like the note that boggans are more capable at identifying them than most other fae. Like, I like that.
Pooka.
Entertaining, but generally fair weather friends, which is a strong insult for a boggan to say.
Redcaps.
Quote, the only kith boggans find wholly unpleasant.
Satyrs.
Can be excellent friends, and this section especially highlights the goat folks' more like thoughtful, introverted side, which doesn't get enough attention, so I'm glad that it has some here.
Selkies.
A bittersweet kith, because the boggans can't really help with their enduring heartache.
Arcadian She.
They can work hard, but they need help adjusting to the world that boggans can provide, and the She better appreciate it.
Autumn She.
More respect for them than most because of their historical willingness to help keep things together.
Slua.
Information friends, up to a point.
Trolls.
Admirable for their duty and honor. So the kiths, I think this is like a fine amount. We get one solid paragraph for each. Most of them have some little interesting quirk.
Yeah. And then we get the houses. Oh my goodness.
This is so many pages.
I think this is more than like the She get sometimes.
Do you think that there was some kind of comment in the development process where they were like, we need to really encourage more ennobled or at least house-affiliated boggans? Because
this is a lot, and it's really hard because they don't repeat the boons and flaws. So like,
yes, or the exile.
I'm kind of like, I didn't pull up my copies. You need to pull up your copy of the core book and like put them side by side to even follow this.
Yeah.
We're not going to go through all this, are we? Like we can do some...
Again, I've got the one-liners. I did want to say, though, I can't remember, if you don't take title, do you still get the boon and flaw for the house?
It never says.
We had those oaths of adoption or whatever they were in Book of Houses, and I was trying to remember. But because here it's like... it's like there are opinions about the boons and flaws, which sometimes seem to bleed into a boggin has these when they join the house, and it was like murky.
Well, there is the distinction between joining the house as a member and joining the house as more like
support staff.
The furniture. Yeah. That's a kinder way, the support staff. And those are different. If you're support staff, you don't get it. But what does full membership mean? Does that require a title? It is unclear.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it could go either way. And sometimes the information in here cleaves towards one or the other. But
okay, do we want to go through all the houses?
I could try to do it all in one breath as a breath exercise and see how it goes, if that's...
I'll just lay it in.
All right. Ready?
Aeson.
So their attitude towards humans rubs the boggins the wrong way, but sometimes they can talk to animals, which is cool.
Allele.
Only the most cutthroat and capable unseelie boggins join this house.
Baelor.
Do not trust, full stop.
Okay, this got me. All the other things, why did this big write-up when it explicitly says there are 0 boggins in this house, and they still give this big, long write-up on... Anyway.
They've still got gossip and opinions about them.
Yeah. Baelman?
Tend to be more support staff than paladins, but are generally cool with them.
Darien?
Provides amazing opportunities for both hospitality and dark gossip.
Danon?
Appealing for finding homes in new places as their thing.
This one, I'm like, what the heck is... Anyway. Yeah. I'd see more Baelor boggins than Danon boggins, but okay. But they definitely talking about the non-boggins here. Okay. Dougal.
They are great for the craftier boggins.
This actually got home for me how much I actually like the C20 take on House Dougal.
It's definitely better than the older take.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, this makes sense. They just upgrade themselves. Okay, yeah. Aeludin.
The scholars and information brokers among the boggins, especially the grumps, are drawn to them.
Fiona.
A place for Epicurean boggins who do nothing halfway.
Gwydion.
Just perfect seneschals. The boggins are, for the Gwydion.
Although, sometimes they might overthrow you. But anyway. Leohan.
All right. I'm going to preface this by saying this only works for the C20 Leonin.
Yep.
A surprising number of boggins. They function kind of like PR and talent management and are apparently the respectable face of Leonin to the rest of Fae society. Make of that what you will. Given Leonin's history with like what they do to the artists that they talent manage, I'm not clear on like... Anyway.
Liam.
Deeply devoted and humble boggins are good fits.
Ska.
Not a great fit, because Skaha life is kind of not the antithesis of boggin values, but like totally disaligned with. Mm-hmm. They're nomadic, they're martial, they're mysterious, they're isolated or introverted maybe, etc.
Varric.
Too cold and distant for most of them.
And then we get to the Gallain, which include Chimera now. Okay.
Can I just... Yeah. I just want to also point out, there's a line where they talk about the boggins, I think it's under Aeson. It says like, oh, Aeson are really dismayed by being in their human bodies or whatever. And it's like the boggins, have experience with their own hosts. And I'm like, wait, what? Hosts? Hosts? The boggin is a boggin. There's no hosting. They settled that centuries ago.
I guess they watched too much Deep Space Nine or something.
Something. And like all of this information, it would be fine if we had like a book of this. If it was like, here's each kith in all of the houses, but the fact that it takes up so much space and feels so different than everything around it.
Boggins.
Yeah.
I maybe can think of, I guess at least we didn't get it in Kithbook Pooka. That would be maybe weirder, but that's about
Yeah. It almost seems like the houses are more important to the boggins than the other kiths from the way it's presented here. I guess you can't join another kith, but,
Yeah. So we get to the Gallain now, which they put Chimera here, but I don't know where else you'd put them. So
and Autumn people.
Yeah, but Autumn people are also under prodigals, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
So Chimera.
They help and harbor the friendly ones and try to redeem the nightmare ones.
Inanimate. Most boggins have a vague idea of the different phyla of the Inanimate. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. With actual opinions on them, which we don't need to go through, but yeah.
Nunehi.
They try to ease tensions and build peaceful relationships with them.
Hsien. Okay.
I actually like the note that the Xian have the most common ground with Boggans among the Gallain. I find that plausible enough.
Yeah. I guess my problem is they're under Galleon and not prodigals.
Well,
Okay.
I'm a separate issue.
Menahune. And what's this? Their origins show some similarity to Hsien? What?
Oh, yeah, I missed that before. I have no idea. But the relationship that the Boggans have with them is similar to the one they have with the Nunyi. So,
Autumn people. Yeah, okay, I like this write up.
yeah, it's good that they avoid the Autumn people, but they actively try to help the ones who have to deal with them more directly. It's like that works.
I just like, we get a little sidebar on the next page on Boggarts. I just like this. I want there to be like some of the more disreputable Boggans like do work with Boggarts and stuff. And they
I
don't.
thought that's what we had in the Shadow Court.
That's what we did. They just
Yeah.
shot this down. They should be working with them. Anyway. So the Thalian, they're very anti-Thalian, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Fomorians, because they're, I like more nuance there. But
Fomorians, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Adian, I guess that's more nuance now.
Interestingly, similar to the Pisky note, we get the note in here that Boggans are the best among the Kithane of understanding the system of Arya and how it changes the Adine. Yep. And I like that. Makes sense.
Yeah. Dantain, which, okay, first of all, I don't like how they do it. Now it flats out says that on very rare occasions that the Dantain can be redeemed, which they was very clear can't be in the core book. Okay.
Well, to seek a way to one day become whole again. Doesn't say they succeed necessarily. But yeah, the Boggans pity them even as they know better than to interact with them.
And then we get the prodigals, where Boggans don't like vampires. Sure. That's fine.
The vampires could get some help if they just asked nicely.
Werewolves?
Deal with them as quickly and pleasantly as possible.
The Magi, which I just love that, like, werewolf and changeling just present this view of mages that, like, is not really in Mage the Ascension at all, but it's very, very consistent that mages come around and will steal your energy, both from you and your freeholds and your whatever.
And they're also always like unpredictable and run the full gamut of everything. So it's like, why even bother? But yeah. But they do help mages in need. They're just cautious and practical about it.
Yeah. Wraiths often notice Boggans, even if the Boggans have no ability to notice Wraiths. It's a special ability. It was a weird thing about how Wraiths can't have banality. I'm like, that makes no sense. Have you met the hierarchy?
Aren't specters supposed to be really like high banal?
I don't think necessarily. I think it's more like a Thalian thing.
Yeah, okay.
But the hierarchy would be the most.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh, I think like technocrats would look at the hierarchy and go, I think you guys need to loosen up a little.
I imagine it's almost as variable as vampires, where it's the similar caveat of the older they are, the more likely they are to be banal.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the wraiths you encounter typically are not going to be banal. It's the other ones. And then we get some weird stuff. We get some stuff on mummies.
Friends.
Demons.
Definitely not friends.
Yeah, I think this demons doesn't seem like demon. The fallen demons seem like other demons.
Yeah.
Hunters. That made sense.
There was the nice note that hunters should be steered away from changeling communities towards other, truer threats.
Yeah. And then auto people in here again.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect this chapter was like written by all three authors because it feels like three different writing styles. So.
Yeah.
And again, each of those styles I think would be fine on their own in its own context, but having them all together here in the chapter was really discombobulating.
So the next beginning of chapter has your favorite part of every Kith book. The character write-ups with a picture with all of them hanging out with some other people.
Yep. So yeah, we get 4 of these this time around. I just noticed also that they're playing Settlers of Catan in that picture in the foreground. Yeah. Anyway, we have the Knowledge Keeper, the indie bookstore owner who likes to share random factoids. Sure. The Inquisitive Matchmaker had a neat chrysalis in that she helped set up 2 of her friends, but otherwise feels like kind of a mishmash character and is a little bit creepy. Like,
yeah, and it's kind of all over the place. So it's, but
yeah. It's like a Mary Sue Boggin is the only way I can
But
think
well,
of to
I mean the
describe
legacy. I mean even the Seelie legacy's the Seelie legacy's creepier than the Unseelie. Yeah.
it. Yeah. Anyway, then there's the behind the scenes drama queen, who's a modern talent agent and promoter with, oh boy, contracts for. So careful around that one.
I think I've met this person. Anyway, the next one, I'm like, this isn't a boggin. What are you doing?
Yeah.
This is like a red cap character.
Well, really a Cluricon almost.
Yeah, like there's a lot of kids that could be just not boggin. Just because you're a barkeep,
Yeah.
this is a barkeep that's not a boggin. That's the thing about the character that's a bit of a twist, but it's a boggin.
Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't really enthusiastic about any of these. What I did like was that in addition to the background concept and role-playing hints, we get gossip, and it talks about their preferred gossip. And I think that's a really great... I would love to see more kid-specific things in these templates.
Yeah. I find, except for the last one, I found the first three were acceptable.
Yeah, they're fine. It's just none of them really stood out to me.
Yeah.
Also, none of them is mathematically a starting build.
Yeah.
I much preferred the famous faces section. Like, all of these were... Again, it's the usual thing of they all definitely feel like PCs. I think a couple we've actually seen elsewhere, like Saffron has certainly popped up before.
Well, I wouldn't say they all feel like PCs. Like the first one, Duchess Priya, that's a very long chronicle.
They're all characters who have appeared in someone's game.
Yeah,
is what I feel like.
So yeah, the first is Duchess Priya Abdugul, who I think may have been one of the first changelings, and then would have become a Seoshan pretty early.
Yeah.
So
I like the Mona Lisa art, but she's making an atlas of all the balefires. Good for her.
Old Finny.
Old Finny. The battle-scarred mob consigliere gone global. But surprise, he's Seelie. He's got honor.
I love that they have the wife of Bath here. That just love.
She's one of my two favorites.
Yeah, but she's not Seoshan. She just reincarnates. But she hasn't shown up since the early 20th century, and Boggins are worried.
So there's this note about them actively tracking her soul's reincarnation. How do they do that? I must ask. What does that mean?
Will-O-Wisper.
Yeah, maybe.
Or other soothsay, or soothsay unleashing.
Something.
I don't even know how to pronounce this next one.
Dame Una Kinane, which is a confusing last name to have, but the nightmare chimera hunter who crafts trophies from their skulls.
I like her.
She's great.
She does it because it ties into her the boggin frailty because she's helping people who are terrorized by nightmare chimera.
Exactly. And these portraits are just superb.
Yep.
I love these.
Okay, anyway. Saffron.
Oh, she's everything.
Yeah.
The tomboy farm girl turned DIY fashion cosplay streamer Shadow Court something headscarf.
This is going back to the other meaning of Shadow Court, so
yeah.
Or one of the 4 meanings we get.
I mean, she's a great character. She's popped up in fiction that we've seen elsewhere, but yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, if you gave her a different secret society, that was what the Shadow Court means in this paragraph, that might have worked better. But other than that, and then Greg Ganaway,
my other favorite.
Okay, that makes me want to have more soft serve ice cream. Anyway,
he's got a Shakespeare-themed, pun-filled milkshake wagon called Billy Shakes. 100% brilliant. But he also has this traveling food truck freehold caravan, which is... I like that as an alternative Thorpe, just a food truck caravan. Mm-hmm. Each of them with their own little balefire stove.
Get the appendix, odds and ends, starting with some merits and flaws, which, like many merits and flaws in various Kith books and whatnot, there's a lot of neat ideas, and then the mechanics, I'm like, but...
Were there any that particularly that you liked or hated?
Well, interesting was, Digital Dreamers is, I like the concept, really hate the execution, where I think it should be a merit that lets you do reverie over the internet, and then you take the dreamer's background would make more sense. That
would have been really cool. Yeah, I was thinking it would have made sense as an alternate background, like an alternate form of Dreamers. But no, I like that idea of epiphanies through that. And we've seen a bit of that with the Knocker Ready-Made character who does the streaming, deep dreaming games or whatever. I kind of liked, even though I'm not so into the matchmaking angle, I don't think I would play it. I liked the Alisun's Blessing merit for spending glamour to create meet cutes. It's all right. That's totally too many points to spend on that, but I like that it's basically create a Hallmark movie.
Mm-hmm.
If any kith is going to have that.
Yeah. And I think Minimus of Spite's also a fun one. It's a flaw.
Yeah. I thought Second Life was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Pun notwithstanding, like doing social dynamics through remote means. Especially for those Baggins who are like the diplomatic, or spy kind.
It's a pun that aged out even by 2018.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I dig like the spread and the diversity and the thematic appropriateness of all of these mechanics aside.
Yeah, these are all, if somebody when I want to take this merit will be like, or flaw, I'd be like, okay, maybe I'm going to adjust the mechanics and point thing, but like the actual existence of it, yeah.
Yeah. We then end with one oath and one treasure.
I love this kind of oath.
Oh.
The oath of the open door, and it lets you extend it to one other person who isn't a boggin. You can still get your speed up thing.
Even mortals and prodigals.
If they're enchanted. I love that kind of like oath to extend what's possible.
Did you also notice that if an enchanted mortal or prodigal swears this oath, then the enchantment duration lasts until the work is done? It's like, yes, we found one way around that limitation.
But I mean, that doesn't actually make any sense because the enchantment duration is measured in days. Are they going to be sitting there watching you clean for 4 days? No.
I mean, maybe. Well, maybe you have to illuminate a book.
Yeah, but you're going to get tired.
Something.
Just because you do it 3 times faster doesn't mean you do it 3 times longer. But for some reason, they have something on the crafty thing, which this shouldn't have been here. They already talked about the birthright. They had a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
It's a bit weird placement. And the Underhill tea service, I was like...
Yeah. I like that it's a modular treasure. Like, you spend 1 to 5 dots, and then you choose however many of these effects. And that's something that I've tried to use elsewhere as well. But I'm sad that that's the only treasure. And more oaths would have been fine. More crunch would have been fine. Like, the merits and flaws are great, but then this last page of the book, it's like, oh, here you get this one tea set treasure. And I was like, oh. And no character sheet either, which was disappointing. There is a character sheet in the printed version, but it is just the standard one. Yeah, so it's not like a bespoke boggin sheet.
That was odd, but I'm not going to rip up my book to make it up. And then my printed one also had go buy Book of Freeholds and
Cyan and Pugmire.
Yeah.
Coming soon. I did like also the back cover's note of, for the first time ever, the secrets and gossip of the Boggin Kith are being shared with outsiders. It's like, yes, they waited a long time to say that. And that's the book. Yeah. I have a few quick notes comparing it with the unofficial old kithbook Baggins that I can fly through, if that's...
Sure.
So, all right, so chapter by chapter, because they actually do align quite well. This kithbook, the story in it was very bittersweet and felt very in the spirit of modern fae, but the old kithbook that revealed the hidden birthright of Baggins, where nobody's going to mess with them because they're just so nice to everybody, and it was also more madcap and epic, that's a win for the old book for me on the initial opening story. History chapters, both of them were kind of similarly uneven, not in a bad way, just kind of picking and choosing what they emphasized. They do have somewhat complementary distribution, which, like, the old one talks more about religion and mob bosses. This one talks about printing press and the digital age. There's some shared material, like talking about abolition, and Hestia is in both. So I guess tie on the history chapter.
Is there shared authors?
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah.
But I would certainly imagine that the authors of this one were aware of the old one.
Mm-hmm.
The Society and Culture chapter of the old one has a decent write-up of birthrights, good narrative voice, some depth on things like home and freeholds. There's the weird sidebar about satyrs thirsty for boggins, but whatever. The new one, though, just has so much more. And I honestly did not feel like any of the space in chapter 2 here was, like, wasted. Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily agree with every single element, but it was a solid chapter. So definitely wins on that one. So then the third one, the opinions chapter. I actually forgot until I went back and looked. We did talk about this before. The old Kith book was just as exhaustive with the Kiths and like having 5 or 6 different boggins weigh in about each one, but it didn't have the houses. And the old one had so much more about the courts and the escheat. And importantly, something desperately lacking in this new one, they had boggin societies. So the old kithbook, I think, definitely did that chapter better.
Mm-hmm.
The templates, the ones here feel more niche than the old kithbook, but the famous faces are much more engaging to me, and that's the part of the chapter that I always gravitate towards anyway, so win for the new kithbook. And then for the crunchy bits, the old one, I don't know that I would use the Domovoi as written in the old book, but it had so many more things. Like, it had merits and flaws, but then it also had reminders about Ogmen, a bucket full of treasures, some new traits. So I do think the old kithbook kind of came out ahead on the appendix. So there's some overlap, and there's some overlap with variances of opinion, but I do think the ideas in both are useful and helpful for boggin players. It makes sense to get the new one because it's C20, but the old one is also freely available to fill in the gaps. See our episode linked in the show notes for that.
Yeah. How would you rate this? Now we've done all the official kithbooks.
I know, we need like a scoreboard or something. Yeah. I would also put it among the better ones. I'd probably put it like tied with the old boggin one. It's hard for me to pick which one I like more.
But if you're only counting the officially published ones,
I might put this one third.
Okay.
Like, Slua is still my favorite.
Yep.
Ishu, I think, would just edge this one out for me.
I think I actually, before we did, I'd flipped through this before we went to read this for the podcast, and I put this pretty low, actually. And then I read through it properly, and I'd put it actually second after Slua.
Yeah, it's solid. It's good.
Yeah.
And they had the benefit of, well, I imagine, I don't know, they had the benefit of not art house production.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the color makes it feel nice, but if I'm just thinking just strictly the text and not talking about like layout things or art even, I think I'd still put it second. Chapter 2 really carries it. Like, the rest of it's good, but it's really good second chapter 2. And it doesn't have horrible problematic elements, which disqualify a whole bunch of the other kith books. So,
hey, it was the 90s. Yeah. I could have used a few more like unexpected left field takes on Baggins, but it's fine. I mean,
that'd be like his complaint, but it's like that ties into C20's sort of black and white, Seelie good, unseelie bad take on the courts, which bugs me. But
ultimately, the line didn't last long enough for more nuance on that. So yay, we did it.
We did it. So you can find us on changelingthepodcast.com. You can also listen to us on YouTube if that's your preference, YouTube Music or YouTube for Changeling the Podcast, and leave a comment there. You can send us all the latest gossip on discord.me/CTP. You can email us, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You can go to our Facebook page for Changeling the Podcast, and you can send us a toot, changelingpod@dice.camp.
Links to all of these will be provided in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain the non-boggin known as Pooka.
And remember, I forgot my thing I was going to say. Crap. Pooka, can you help me?
I was just going to say, kithbook Baggins is really such precious. For this kithbook, we weren't quite sure what to do for the outro, but in the end settled for attaching the names of our patrons to the freehold chore wheel and giving it a spin. It seemed like the most egalitarian and equanimous choice in keeping with the Baggins' notions of pulling together and getting things done. So, while we always like to give a shout out to our patrons at the end of each episode, we'd especially like to call out their excellent work on individual tasks this time. Thanks to Derek for watering the mandrakes, Dorcadus for mucking out the rookery, Ellerus for coordinating the cheesecake competition, Hugo the Bog Person for polishing the hatchets, Ia Bull for stacking all the books in interesting towers, Jason Vines for upgrading the dragons, Oreo for installing the bottomless pit in the garbage room, Raz Caboose for keeping us on our toes with surprise ninja attacks, Sandchigger for maintaining the colony of Mars bees, Sija for washing and folding all the interior space, Terry Robinson for tuning the collection of sentient but cantankerous zithers, Tricerabeth for mopping up the unknown substance in the laboratory, and Victor Torre for making sure everyone gets their ration of dross and specie. If you too would like to join the cleanup crew to end all cleanup crews, do consider swinging by our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and signing up. We also welcome reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or just tell your friends about our show when social dynamics allow. Gratitude as always for your listens and appreciation, doubly so for your feedback and contributions, and until next time, keep on dreaming.